from somebody that's here, person works, "Sir, the FBI just came in." I said, "What? The FBI? Who?"
At 9:17 a.m. On a cold February morning, the FBI director stood before a wall of cameras inside the Los Angeles field office and made an announcement that sent shockwaves through every law enforcement agency in the country. Federal authorities had just dismantled what they called the largest synthetic drug precursor trafficking network ever discovered on American soil. The numbers were almost incomprehensible. $2.3 billion in illicit chemical sales, over 940 tons of restricted precursor chemicals seized, $127 million in cash confiscated from warehouses, storage units, and hidden vaults across California, 89 arrests spanning 3 countries, and at the center of it all, a shadowy chemical broker named Raymond Chen, a naturalized U.S. citizen with deep ties to Chinese manufacturing cartels, who had spent the last decade building a pipeline that supplied every major drug cartel in North America with the raw materials needed to produce fentanyl, methamphetamine, and synthetic opioids on an industrial scale. This was not a drug bust. This was a chemical warfare operation disguised as international trade. And what federal agents uncovered in the warehouses of Los Angeles was not just toxic chemicals. It was a blueprint for mass death. You think the fentanyl crisis is bad now. You have no idea how close we came to something far worse. And what comes next will make your blood run cold. It began at 3:48 a.m., 72 hours before that press conference, in the industrial district of Vernon, California, just south of downtown Los Angeles. The air was thick with smog, yellow streetlights flickered over cracked asphalt. The streets were empty except for a few long-haul trucks idling outside closed warehouses. No one noticed the convoy. 18 black SUVs. No sirens, no lights. Moving in perfect silence. Inside were over 120 federal agents. FBI, DEA, ICE, DS. Hazmat teams in full protective gear. Chemical weapons specialists borrowed from the U.S. Army. And SWAT units trained for high-risk industrial raids. They had been tracking Raymond Chen's operation for 14 months, and tonight, they were going to tear it apart. The target was a massive 60,000-square-foot warehouse registered under the name Pacific Harmony Logistics, a shell company that claimed to import agricultural equipment and industrial solvents. But federal investigators knew the truth. This was a chemical superlab, a precursor distribution hub, a factory of death, and inside those walls were enough toxic materials to poison half the state. At exactly 3:52 a.m., the raid began. Flashbangs shattered the night. The reinforced steel doors of the warehouse exploded inward under breaching charges. SWAT teams poured inside, weapons raised, scanning through clouds of dust and chemical fumes. The interior was massive. Rows of steel shelving stretched hundreds of feet in every direction, stacked floor to ceiling with unmarked barrels, plastic drums, and industrial containers. The air stank of chemicals. Bitter, acidic, burning the throat. Agents in hazmat suits moved carefully through the aisles, scanning labels, checking manifests, and what they found was a nightmare. Over 340 tons of precursor chemicals. Methylamine, phenylacetic acid, acetic anhydride, 4-anilino-N-phenethylpiperidine, also known as AMP, the primary precursor for fentanyl production. N-phenyl-4-piperidone, or NPP, another fentanyl building block. Ephedrine derivatives, pseudoephedrine in bulk powder form, industrial-grade acids used in methamphetamine synthesis, and worst of all, fentanyl analogs already synthesized and ready for shipment, stored in vacuum-sealed containers labeled as industrial cleaning agents. This was not a small-time smuggling operation. This was a full-scale chemical manufacturing network designed to supply every cartel superlab on the West Coast. DEA chemists estimated that the materials seized in this one warehouse alone were enough to produce over 50 million lethal doses of fentanyl, 12 tons of crystal methamphetamine, and untold quantities of synthetic opioids that had never even been seen before on American streets. But the chemicals were just the beginning. In a secured office at the back of the warehouse, agents found something far more dangerous: a steel safe, encrypted laptops, server racks humming with data, and inside the safe, ledgers, handwritten, in Mandarin and English, detailing every transaction, every shipment, every buyer. The ledgers listed cartel names: Sinaloa operatives in Arizona, Ching contacts in Texas, independent trafficking networks in Oregon, Washington, and Nevada. Each entry included chemical types, quantities, delivery schedules, and payment amounts in cryptocurrency. But the most disturbing part was the delivery method. The chemicals were being shipped directly through the Port of Los Angeles, mislabeled as industrial solvents, paint thinners, and agricultural fertilizers. Every shipment was accompanied by falsified customs documents approved by brokers who had been bribed or coerced. And every single shipment had been waved through without inspection. For years, simultaneously, other teams hit 5 additional locations across Southern California. In San Bernardino, agents raided a storage facility where over 180 tons of precursor chemicals were hidden inside shipping containers labeled as machinery parts. In Long Beach, a residential home in a quiet suburb was breached, revealing a chemical repackaging operation where industrial barrels were being broken down into smaller containers for distribution to cartel buyers. In Riverside, a truck depot was stormed, and agents found a fleet of refrigerated trucks loaded with precursor chemicals disguised as food-grade additives. In Anaheim, a luxury condo owned by one of Raymond Chen's lieutenants was searched, yielding $14 million in cash vacuums sealed inside walls and hidden beneath custom-built floor panels. And in Ontario, near the airport, agents discovered a private hangar where small aircraft were being used to fly precursor chemicals directly to cartel-controlled airstrips in Mexico and Arizona. By sunrise, federal agents had seized over 940 tons of restricted chemicals, 47 vehicles, 23 properties, and enough evidence to connect Raymond Chen's network to every major fentanyl and methamphetamine production operation west of the Mississippi. But the real horror was still buried in the data. 16 hours later, inside a secure FBI cyber forensics lab in downtown Los Angeles, analysts were still trying to process the scale of what they had uncovered. The encrypted servers seized from the Vernon warehouse contained over 42,000 files, shipping manifests, financial transactions, supplier contacts in China, buyer networks across the United States, Mexico, and Canada, and at the center of it all, a master operation with a code name that made even hardened investigators feel sick: Project Red Harvest. This was not just a chemical smuggling ring. This was a coordinated international effort to flood the United States with synthetic drug precursors on a scale never before attempted. And Raymond Chen was not just a broker. He was the architect. The financial web was staggering. Chen had created 26 shell companies, each one registered in a different state or foreign country. Fake import-export firms, ghost logistics companies, sham chemical distributorships that claimed to serve legitimate industries like pharmaceuticals, agriculture, and manufacturing. The companies had names like Global Health Solutions, Pacific Industrial Supply, Terra Verde Chemicals, and Apex Scientific Distribution. Every one of them was fake. Every one of them existed solely to launder money and disguise the movement of precursor chemicals from Chinese suppliers to American cartel buyers. The money flowed through a maze of offshore accounts. Banks in Hong Kong, Singapore, the Cayman Islands, Panama, Switzerland. Over $2.3 billion had been processed through this network in the past 6 years alone. Payments came in through cryptocurrency wallets, wire transfers disguised as equipment purchases, and bulk cash deposits made by cartel operatives at branches across California, Arizona, and Texas. The cash was then converted into legitimate business revenue, taxed, and reinvested into real estate, tech startups, and even green energy companies that received state and federal grants. But here is where it gets darker. Raymond Chen was not working alone. And he was not just selling to cartels, he was selling to anyone who would pay. The investigators found buyer lists that included domestic methamphetamine cooks, rogue chemists, underground fentanyl labs run by street gangs, and even foreign terrorist organizations seeking to produce chemical weapons. Chen did not care who his customers were or what they did with the materials. He cared about profit, and he had built a system so efficient, so protected, that for over a decade, he operated in plain sight without a single federal raid. Until now. The digital forensics team kept digging. And then they found it. A digital signature. An encrypted authorization key embedded in hundreds of transaction files. The key was linked to a high-ranking official inside the California Department of Industrial Relations, a man named Vincent Zhao, a 53-year-old deputy director responsible for overseeing chemical import regulations and workplace safety inspections. Zhao's authorization key appeared on falsified inspection reports, expedited import permits, and regulatory exemptions that allowed Chen's shipments to bypass standard safety reviews. This was not corruption, this was command-level collusion. Zhao had turned the state's own regulatory system into a shield for the largest precursor trafficking network in American history. He had received over $8.4 million in payments over 7 years, funneled through a fake consulting firm and a series of real estate transactions that made the money look clean. And he had done it all while sitting in a government office, signing documents, and smiling at press conferences about public safety. This is not negligence. This is engineered treason. And the operation had just begun. At 5:23 a.m. the following morning, inside a joint task force command center established at the Los Angeles FBI headquarters, over 60 federal officials stood in front of a massive digital map of California and the southwestern United States. The screen was covered in red markers. Each one represented a location tied to Project Red Harvest: chemical storage sites, distribution hubs, cartel buyer networks, shipping routes, corrupt officials. The markers stretched from Los Angeles to San Diego, east through Arizona and New Mexico, north into Oregon and Washington, and south across the Mexican border into Tijuana, Mexicali, and Ciudad Juarez. This was not a California problem. This was a continental crisis, and it required a continental response. The mission was codenamed Operation Firewall. The objective was total dismantling. Over 1,400 federal agents were mobilized. FBI, DIA, ICE, ATF, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, hazmat specialists, chemical weapons disposal teams, Black Hawk helicopters, armored tactical units, K-9 units trained to detect chemical precursors, and even elements of the U.S. Navy were placed on standby to intercept suspected cartel vessels off the California coast using destroyer-class warships equipped with boarding teams and surveillance drones. This was not a raid. This was a siege on the synthetic drug supply chain itself. At exactly 6 a.m., the operation launched. In Los Angeles, agents stormed a chemical repackaging facility in Boyle Heights where cartel operatives were breaking down industrial barrels of methylamine into portable containers for transport to Arizona meth labs. The suspects tried to flee through a back alley but were cornered by tactical units descending from rooftops. Inside, agents seized 94 tons of precursor chemicals, $6.2 million in cash, and encrypted phones containing direct communications with Raymond Chen's network. In San Diego, near the border crossing at Otay Mesa, a joint team of DIA and ICE agents raided a trucking company that had been moving precursor chemicals disguised as automotive parts. Agents found 67 tons of chemicals hidden inside false compartments built into semi-truck trailers. The trucks were scheduled to cross into Mexico within hours. The drivers were arrested on the spot. The chemicals were secured, and the route was shut down. In Fresno, a rural warehouse complex was breached by SWAT teams backed by hazmat specialists. Inside, they found a fully operational chemical mixing facility where precursors were being combined into pre-synthesized drug compounds ready for final production. The air inside was toxic. Agents had to wear full respirators. They seized 120 tons of chemicals, industrial mixing equipment worth over $2 million, and captured 11 cartel members, including a Chinese national who was identified as one of Raymond Chen's top suppliers. In Phoenix, Arizona, a luxury home in the foothills was raided at dawn. The owner was a shell company director who had been laundering money for Chen's network. Inside, agents found $18 million in cash stacked in a hidden basement vault, along with gold bars, jewelry, and real estate deeds for properties across 3 states. In Portland, Oregon, a shipping container yard was stormed by federal agents who discovered 48 containers filled with mislabeled precursor chemicals that had been sitting in the yard for weeks, waiting for cartel buyers to collect them. The chemicals were seized. The yard operators were arrested, and the paper trail led directly back to Raymond Chen. And at the Port of Los Angeles, in a coordinated operation involving over 200 agents, customs officials, and port security, federal teams locked down an entire terminal and began inspecting every container scheduled for shipment over the next 72 hours. They found 16 containers loaded with precursor chemicals disguised as industrial cleaners, all cleared for export to Mexico. The shipments were halted. The chemicals were seized, and the customs brokers who had approved the paperwork were taken into custody. By mid-afternoon, the map had changed. Red markers were turning blue. Locations secured. Suspects in custody. Chemicals neutralized. The numbers kept climbing. 940 tons of precursor chemicals seized. 89 arrests. $127 million in cash and assets frozen. Properties, vehicles, aircraft, communication networks dismantled. And it was not just cartel operatives being dragged out in handcuffs, it was businessmen, warehouse managers, shipping brokers, and government officials who had sworn to protect the public. The synthetic drug supply chain took more damage in 8 hours than it had in the last 8 years. But the real betrayal was still coming. Back at the command center, federal investigators were combing through the servers seized from Chen's network. And what they found was a level of corruption that made even seasoned agents want to walk away. The cartel had not just infiltrated California's chemical import system, it had infiltrated the enforcement system itself. 31 officials across federal, state, and local agencies were on Raymond Chen's payroll. Customs inspectors who waved shipments through without inspection. State chemical regulators who approved permits for fake companies. Port security officers who looked the other way during container transfers. Even 2 DIA analysts who had been leaking information about ongoing investigations directly to Chen's network, giving the operation advance warning of raids and surveillance operations. They had been receiving payments ranging from $20,000 to $75,000 per month, delivered through encrypted cryptocurrency transfers that were nearly impossible to trace. The investigators pulled up the logs. They saw it all. Inspection schedules altered to ensure Chen's shipments arrived when corrupt inspectors were on duty. Regulatory audits falsified to show compliance. Hazmat reports forged to hide the true contents of containers. Internal communications leaked to cartel handlers weeks before federal operations were launched. Evidence logs tampered with. Witness testimonies buried. It was not just a few bad actors. It was a parallel regulatory system. A second chain of command that answered not to the law, but to Raymond Chen and the Chinese suppliers who fed his empire. One of the most painful moments came when agents interviewed an honest customs inspector who had flagged a suspicious shipment at the Port of Los Angeles 2 years earlier. The shipment matched every red flag for precursor chemicals. The inspector filed a report, requested a full inspection, and was overruled by his supervisor, who told him the shipment had already been cleared by higher authorities. The inspector pushed back, and within a week he was reassigned to a desk job processing paperwork. The shipment went through. Inside that container were 18 tons of fentanyl precursor. Those precursors were used to produce drugs that killed at least 340 people over the following 6 months. The inspector did his job. The system betrayed him, and hundreds of people died because of it. Federal agents moved swiftly. They arrested the corrupt officials in coordinated raids across California, Arizona, and Washington, D.C. No warnings. No leaks. They were taken into custody at their homes, in their offices, at their desks. The badge does not make you immune. It makes your betrayal unforgivable. And the system that allowed this to happen, the system that enabled a chemical trafficking network to operate for over a decade while regulators and inspectors were paid to look away, that system was about to be burned to the ground and rebuilt from scratch. But the full picture was still emerging, because Raymond Chen's plan was not just about California. It was about the entire country. The investigators zoomed out. They pulled up a continental supply map that had been hidden in Chen's encrypted files. And the scale of what they were seeing was almost impossible to process. Project Red Harvest was designed to turn California into the primary chemical gateway for synthetic drug production across North America. The network used a combination of legitimate trade infrastructure and cartel logistics to move precursor chemicals without detection. Shipping containers arrived at the Port of Los Angeles from manufacturing facilities in China, mislabeled as industrial solvents, fertilizers, or cleaning agents. Customs documents were falsified using templates provided by corrupt brokers. Inspections were bypassed through bribes or regulatory exemptions. Once the containers cleared customs, they were transported to warehouse hubs in Vernon, San Bernardino, and Ontario, where the chemicals were repackaged into smaller shipments and distributed to cartel buyers across the West Coast, Southwest, and Midwest. The network moved an estimated 6.8 tons of precursor chemicals per week. That is over 350 tons per year, enough to produce billions of fentanyl pills, tens of thousands of pounds of methamphetamine, and countless doses of synthetic opioids that did not even have names yet. Trucking companies contracted to haul agricultural products were used as cover. Refrigerated trucks carried chemicals alongside legitimate food shipments. Way stations were bypassed using prearranged routes and schedules shared by corrupt logistics coordinators. And when shipments did get stopped, the paperwork was always perfect, because the system had been designed to make everything look legal. The chemicals flowed like water. From China to California, from California to Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and beyond. And from there, they fed the cartel superlabs that produced the drugs killing Americans by the tens of thousands every single year. The final piece of the puzzle came from a file buried deep in the server archives. It was labeled Phase 4. The investigators opened it, and what they read made them realize that everything they had dismantled so far was just the foundation. Phase 4 was Raymond Chen's endgame. He was not content to supply cartels. He wanted to control them. The plan detailed the construction of a network of cartel-owned chemical manufacturing facilities on U.S. soil, disguised as legitimate pharmaceutical or industrial plants. These facilities would produce precursor chemicals domestically, eliminating the need for overseas shipments and reducing the risk of interdiction. Chen had already identified 12 potential sites across California, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. He had secured financing through shell companies and fake investors. He had recruited chemists with advanced degrees from universities in China and Mexico. And he had begun negotiations with cartel leadership to create a vertically integrated supply chain where the cartels would own every step of production, from raw chemicals to finished narcotics. This was not infiltration, this was colonization. And if Phase 4 had succeeded, the United States would have become the largest synthetic drug manufacturing zone on the planet, with cartels operating industrial-scale chemical plants under the cover of legitimate business, protected by layers of corporate paperwork, regulatory exemptions, and corrupt officials. The system was not broken. It was being redesigned. And Raymond Chen was the architect. But here is the thing about power. It does not always announce itself. It does not come with violence and chaos. Sometimes it comes quietly. Sometimes it hides behind spreadsheets and shipping manifests. Sometimes it wears a suit and speaks the language of business and efficiency. And that is when it is most dangerous, because you do not see it until it is already inside, until it has reshaped the system, until it controls the supply, the money, the officials, and the future. Raymond Chen understood that. He knew that no one would suspect a respected businessman, a naturalized citizen, of commanding a chemical empire that fed the deadliest drug crisis in American history. He knew that his reputation, his connections, and his legitimate businesses were his shields, and he used them for over a decade, until the FBI tore those shields apart and dragged the truth into the light. The cost of this operation, the real cost, cannot be measured in tons of chemicals or billions of dollars. It is measured in lives. In the 17-year-old girl in Sacramento who took what she thought was a prescription pill and died of fentanyl poisoning in her high school bathroom. In the father in Phoenix who relapsed on methamphetamine and overdosed in a motel room while his children waited in the car outside. In the communities across California, Arizona, and beyond that have been hollowed out by addiction, where entire neighborhoods are ghost towns, where families are shattered, where hope has been replaced by despair. That is the cost. And it is unforgivable. This story is a warning. It is a reminder that the synthetic drug crisis is not just about cartels in Mexico or street dealers in American cities. It is about infrastructure. It is about supply chains. It is about chemical brokers who operate in the shadows of legitimate trade and government officials who sell their oaths for cash. And it is about a system that was infiltrated so deeply for so long that stopping it required over 1,000 federal agents, military support, and a coordinated operation across 3 countries. The FBI, ICE, DHS, and every honest agent who participated in Operation Firewall did what needed to be done. They tore the network apart, they exposed the corruption, and they proved that no one, no matter how connected, no matter how protected, is above the law. If you are still watching this, tap like so more people see this story. Share it. Because the public needs to understand that the fentanyl killing their neighbors, the methamphetamine destroying their communities, it did not just appear. It was manufactured, it was supplied, and it was enabled by people who chose profit over human life. Comment expose if you want corruption like this dragged into the light, because sunlight is the only disinfectant that works against rot this deep. The synthetic drug crisis is not slowing down, it is evolving. And the only way to stop it is to cut off the supply at the source. Raymond Chen is in federal custody. His network is dismantled. His empire is ash. But the fight is not over. Because for every operation like this that gets exposed, there are others still running. Still shipping chemicals. Still bribing officials. Still feeding the cartels. Still killing Americans. The question is not whether it is happening. The question is whether we have the will to see it and the courage to stop it. That is the real story. And that is why you need to keep watching, keep asking questions, keep demanding accountability. Because the moment we stop paying attention is the moment they rebuild. And the next network will be smarter, more hidden, more dangerous. That is the truth. And it is up to all of us to make sure it never gets that far again.